Have you ever looked at a map of the world and wondered, why does it seem like the Middle East is always in the news for another conflict? It's a question many of us have asked. The headlines flash, the images are intense, and it can feel like a never-ending cycle. But what's really behind it all? It's not one single thing, but a complex mix of history, resources, and beliefs that have been simmering for centuries. Let's start by rewinding the clock. Imagine the Middle East 100 years ago. It wasn't a collection of countries with neat lines on a map like we see today. For centuries, much of the region was part of the Ottoman Empire, a vast and diverse state. But after World War I, this empire collapsed. European powers, mainly Britain and France, stepped in and drew new borders. The problem, these lines were often drawn based on their own interests, not on the ethnic, religious, or tribal realities on the ground. Think about it, they essentially took a rich tapestry of different communities and cut it up with a ruler. This created new countries where rival groups were forced to live together. Unfriendly communities were suddenly separated by a national border. This decision, known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, planted the seeds for many of the conflicts we see today. It created a foundation of instability from the very beginning. Now, let's talk about something buried deep beneath the desert sands. Oil. In the early 20th century, vast reserves of oil were discovered in the Middle East. Suddenly, this region became incredibly important to the rest of the world. Industrialized nations needed oil to power their economies, their cars, and their factories. This transformed the Middle East from a distant land into a global strategic prize. Foreign powers began to get heavily involved, backing certain leaders and governments to ensure a steady flow of oil. This foreign influence often propped up authoritarian regimes, which suppressed their own people, but kept the oil flowing. So, while oil brought immense wealth to some, it also brought a new layer of international competition and interference, which often sidelined the interests and desires of the local populations. It became a resource curse, fueling both internal resentment and external meddling. On top of the historical borders and the economic prize of oil, there's the powerful force of religion. The Middle East is the birthplace of three of the world's major monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This makes the land holy to billions of people around the globe. Cities like Jerusalem are sacred to all three, but within Islam itself, there is a major division that has shaped the region for over 1,000 years. The split between Sunni and Shia Muslims. This division dates back to a disagreement over who should succeed the Prophet Muhammad. Today, this isn't just a theological difference, it's a major political fault line. Countries like Saudi Arabia see themselves as the leader of the Sunni world, while Iran champions the Shia cause. This rivalry plays out across the region, as both countries support different groups and governments in places like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. This turns local political disputes into much larger, regional proxy wars, where each side is backed by a powerful patron. This religious dimension adds a layer of deep-seated identity and passion to political conflicts, making them much harder to resolve. So you have these new, artificial countries, filled with immense oil wealth that attracts foreign powers, and layered with ancient religious divisions. It's a recipe for instability. But there is another crucial piece of the puzzle: the post-World War II era and the Cold War. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union became the world's two superpowers, and they competed for influence everywhere, including the Middle East. The US would back one country, and the Soviet Union would back its rival. They poured weapons and money into the region, not necessarily to help the people, but to gain a strategic advantage over their Cold War enemy. This arms race made the region even more militarized and volatile. When the Cold War ended, you might think things would calm down, but the weapons and the rivalries remained. And then there's the story of Israel and Palestine. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 on land that Palestinians also considered their homeland has been one of the most persistent sources of conflict in the modern Middle East. For Israelis, it was the fulfillment of a generations-long dream for a safe homeland after centuries of persecution. For Palestinians, it was what they call the Nakba, or the catastrophe, as hundreds of thousands were displaced. This core conflict has led to several major wars between Israel and its Arab neighbors and has fueled countless other tensions. The struggle for land, sovereignty, and basic rights in this small but incredibly significant territory continues to be a central issue, impacting regional politics and drawing in international powers. The unresolved nature of this conflict sends ripples of instability across the entire region. In more recent decades, we've seen new dynamics emerge. The rise of non-state actors, like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, introduced a new kind of threat. These groups don't represent a country. They promote a radical ideology and use terror to achieve their goals. They exploit the chaos and instability in countries like Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, which were already weakened by war and internal divisions. Their rise prompted even more foreign intervention, like the US-led war on terror, which, while aimed at defeating these groups, sometimes had unintended consequences, further destabilizing the region and creating power vacuums that other groups rushed to fill. And let's not forget the aspirations of the people themselves. In 2011, a wave of protests, known as the Arab Spring, swept across the Middle East. Millions of ordinary people, especially young people, took to the streets demanding democracy, jobs, and an end to corruption and authoritarian rule. It was a moment of incredible hope. In some places, it led to change, but in others, like Syria, Libya, and Yemen, it descended into brutal civil wars. These conflicts drew in regional and international powers, turning internal uprisings into devastating proxy wars that are still raging today. The hopes of the Arab Spring were a powerful reminder that many of the region's problems stemmed from a lack of good governance and opportunities for its citizens. So, when we ask why the Middle East keeps exploding, there's no simple, one-sentence answer. It's not just about one religion, one country, or one resource. It's about the heavy weight of history, where borders were drawn without regard for the people living there. It's about the immense value of oil, which turned the region into a chessboard for global powers. It's about deep religious divides that have been manipulated for political gain. It's about the unresolved conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And it's about the desire of millions of people for a better, more just, and more peaceful life. Understanding this complexity is the first step. It doesn't provide an easy solution, but it helps us see the people behind the headlines and appreciate the tangled web of forces that have shaped this vital, beautiful, and often turbulent part of our world. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this explanation helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shape our world. See you next time.